Karoline Leavitt parked her car in front of the Grand Horizon Hotel, glancing up at the towering building that loomed above her. It was a sleek, modern structure, with glass walls that reflected the bright afternoon sun. She stepped out of her vehicle, her heels clicking softly against the pavement as she adjusted her sunglasses. The air smelled faintly of flowers from the decorative plants lining the entrance, and she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her. It had been months since she last saw Daniel, her husband. He worked long hours managing this upscale hotel for its corporate owners, and their time together had grown scarce. Their marriage wasn't perfect. Distance and miscommunication had taken their toll, but Karoline still loved him deeply. This surprise visit was her way of trying to reconnect, to remind herself why they fell in love in the first place. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her navy blue dress before walking toward the revolving doors. As she entered the lobby, the cool air hit her face, a welcome relief from the heat outside. The interior was just as luxurious as she remembered. Polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, and plush furniture arranged neatly around the space. A large floral arrangement sat on a pedestal near the reception desk, filling the room with a sweet, fresh scent. Behind the counter stood a young woman with curly brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her name tag read, Lisa, and she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else but there. Lisa was scrolling through something on her tablet, occasionally glancing up to greet guests with a distracted smile. She chewed gum loudly, snapping it between her teeth as if oblivious to how unprofessional it seemed. Karoline approached the desk, sliding her sunglasses onto her head. "Hi," she said politely, leaning slightly forward so Lisa would notice. Lisa finally looked up, blinking as though surprised to see someone standing there. "Oh, hi. How can I help you?" "I'd like to book a room for tonight," Karoline replied, keeping her tone friendly despite Lisa's lack of focus. "Sure thing," Lisa said, tapping away on her keyboard without much enthusiasm. "Just one moment." She paused briefly, squinting at the screen. "Okay, we've got a few options available. What kind of room are you looking for?" Karoline shrugged lightly. "Something comfortable, nothing too fancy." Lisa nodded absently, her fingers flying over the keys. "Got it. Let me check." She trailed off, her brow furrowing as she scrolled through the listings. After a moment, she glanced up again. "All right, I think I found something perfect for you. Room 804, it's a deluxe suite with a great view of the city." "That sounds lovely," Karoline said, smiling. "Thank you." "No problem," Lisa replied, already half distracted as she started entering Karoline's information into the system. She asked for her name, ID, and credit card details, typing everything quickly but carelessly. Her gum snapped again, louder this time, and Karoline resisted the urge to comment. Instead, she focused on the task at hand, handing over her driver's license and card when prompted. As Lisa worked, Karoline couldn't help but notice how disorganized she seemed. Papers were scattered across the desk, and a coffee cup sat precariously close to the edge, threatening to spill. The young woman muttered under her breath, frowning at the screen as though it had personally offended her. For a brief second, Karoline wondered if coming here had been a mistake. Surely someone more attentive should have been manning the front desk of such a prestigious hotel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lisa handed back Karoline's belongings. "All set," she announced cheerfully, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Your room key is right here. Just take the elevator to the 8th floor and it'll be the 4th door on your left." "Thank you," Karoline said, taking the key card. She hesitated for a moment, debating whether to ask about Daniel, but then she decided against it. If she wanted this visit to truly be a surprise, she needed to avoid drawing attention to herself. With a final nod, she turned and headed toward the elevators. The ride up was smooth and quiet, giving Karoline time to reflect on her decision. Was this really the best way to fix things with Daniel? Or was she setting herself up for disappointment? She shook her head, pushing those thoughts aside. Now wasn't the time to doubt herself. She had come this far. She might as well see it through. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped out into the hallway, following Lisa's directions to room 804. The carpet beneath her feet muffled the sound of her footsteps, and the soft lighting gave the corridor a cozy, almost intimate feel. As she reached the door, she slid the keycard into the slot, waiting for the tiny green light to flash before turning the handle. What she saw inside stopped her cold. The room wasn't empty. A man sat at the small desk near the window, his back to her as he typed furiously on a laptop. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, his posture rigid with concentration. Papers and notebooks were spread out around him, covering every available surface. The scene was chaotic yet strangely purposeful, as though he were in the middle of something important. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the man spun around, his eyes narrowing as he took in Karoline's presence. He was tall, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore straight through her. His expression shifted from confusion to suspicion in an instant. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low and clipped. "What are you doing here?" Karoline blinked, startled by his reaction. I'm sorry," she stammered. "This is my room, at least, I thought it was." The man frowned, his gaze flicking to the keycard in her hand. "That's impossible. I've been staying here for days." Before either of them could say anything else, Karoline's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, seeing an unknown number flashing on the screen. Hesitant but curious, she answered the call. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Ms. Leavitt," came a voice on the other end. It was Lisa, sounding panicked. "I am so sorry. There's been a huge mistake. I accidentally double-booked your room. You're supposed to be in 806, not 804. Karoline sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "You're kidding, right?" I know, it's completely my fault," Lisa babbled. "If you want, I can move you to a different room immediately. Just let me know what you'd prefer." Glancing at the man still staring at her, Karoline realized arguing wouldn't solve anything. Besides, it wasn't his fault Lisa had messed up. "No, it's fine," she said reluctantly. "I'll figure something out." Hanging up, she turned back to the stranger. "Apparently there's been a mix-up," she explained. "They booked me into your room by accident. I'll go sort it out with the front desk." To her surprise, the man didn't immediately throw her out. Instead, he studied her for a moment, his expression softening slightly. "Wait," he said. "Before you leave, can you tell me your name?" "Karoline Leavitt," she replied, unsure why he cared. He nodded slowly, extending a hand. "Ethan Cole. Look, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm in the middle of something critical. If it's all the same to you, maybe you could stay here until the hotel sorts this out? I promise I won't get in your way." Karoline hesitated. Sharing a room with a complete stranger wasn't exactly ideal, especially under these circumstances. But Ethan seemed sincere enough, and she didn't relish the idea of going back downstairs to deal with Lisa again. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but only until they fix this." "Fair enough," Ethan said, returning to his laptop. "Make yourself comfortable." As Karoline settled onto the edge of the bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from ordinary. Something about Ethan and the strange symbols etched into the corners of his notes set off warning bells in her mind. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a story far stranger than she could have imagined. Karoline sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she tried to make sense of the situation. Ethan was back at the desk, typing furiously on his laptop, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. The room felt tense, like the air itself was charged with something unspoken. She glanced around, taking in the clutter of papers and notebooks scattered across every surface. Strange symbols and diagrams covered the pages, some drawn by hand and others printed in tiny, precise fonts. It looked less like regular work and more like the kind of thing you'd expect from a scientist or an engineer. Curiosity got the better of her. "What exactly are you working on?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. Ethan paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He didn't turn to look at her right away, as if weighing whether or not to answer. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It's complicated, he said simply. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Complicated how? He hesitated again, then shrugged. Let's just say it's theoretical research. Nothing you'd understand unless you're into advanced physics. She frowned, feeling a bit insulted even though she knew he probably hadn't meant it that way. Try me, she challenged softly. I might surprise you. Ethan studied her for a moment, his sharp blue eyes narrowing slightly. Then he gestured toward the papers on the desk. Fine. Take a look. Karoline stood up and walked over, peering down at the documents. What she saw made her blink in confusion. There were equations filled with symbols she didn't recognize, sketches of what looked like machines or devices, and diagrams of circles intersecting with lines and arrows. In the margins, someone, presumably Ethan, had scribbled notes in shorthand. Words like quantum flux, dimensional shift, and energy resonance jumped out at her, but they didn't mean much beyond sounding scientific. This is interesting, she said carefully, trying to sound neutral. What does it all mean? Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. It means I'm trying to figure out how to manipulate certain forces most people don't even believe exist. Forces that could change everything we know about reality. Karoline blinked. That sounds ambitious. You could say that, Ethan replied dryly, but ambition doesn't pay the bills or keep you safe when things go wrong. His tone sent a shiver down her spine. She wasn't sure why, but there was something unsettling about the way he said it, as if he were hinting at dangers she couldn't see. Has something gone wrong? She asked cautiously. Ethan hesitated, glancing at the door as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. Not yet, he said after a pause, but I'm not taking any chances. Before Karoline could press him further, there was a knock at the door. Both of them froze, exchanging a quick glance. Ethan stood up slowly, moving to stand beside the desk while Karoline instinctively stepped back toward the bed. The knock came again, louder this time. Who is it? Ethan called out, his voice steady but wary. It's Daniel Leavitt, came the reply. Is my wife here? Karoline's heart skipped a beat. Of all the people who could have shown up, she hadn't expected it to be Daniel so soon. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan held up a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. He approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole before unlocking it and pulling it open just wide enough to poke his head out. What do you want? Ethan asked bluntly. Daniel stood in the hallway, his arms crossed and his expression stern. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a faint stubble shadowing his jaw. His tie was loosened and his suit jacket hung open, giving him a slightly disheveled appearance. When he saw Ethan, his frown deepened. I'm looking for my wife, Daniel repeated, his voice firm. Lisa told me she booked a room here by mistake. Is she with you? Ethan glanced back at Karoline, who gave him a small nod. He stepped aside, allowing Daniel to enter. As soon as Daniel spotted her sitting on the bed, his face softened with relief, but only for a moment. Then his eyes narrowed again as he took in the scene. The messy room, the piles of papers, and Ethan standing near the desk. What's going on here? Daniel demanded, looking between them. Karoline, why are you in this man's room? It's not what it looks like, Karoline said quickly, standing up to face him. There was a mix-up at the front desk. They accidentally assigned me to this room instead of mine. Daniel turned to Ethan, his suspicion clear. And who are you? My name's Ethan Cole, he replied calmly. I'm a guest here, same as your wife. Well, technically I was here first. Daniel didn't look convinced. A guest doing what? Running some kind of experiment? He gestured toward the papers on the desk. Because that doesn't exactly scream vacation. Ethan crossed his arms, meeting Daniel's gaze without flinching. I'm a physicist. This is part of my work. Not that it's any of your business. The tension in the room thickened, and Karoline felt caught in the middle. She stepped forward, placing herself between the two men. Enough, she said firmly. This isn't helping anyone. Daniel, I came here to surprise you. That's all. And yes, there was a mix-up, but it's being sorted out. Ethan hasn't done anything wrong. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he focused on Karoline, his tone softening. You should have called me first. I would have arranged everything. I wanted it to be spontaneous, she admitted, her voice quieter now. I thought it might help us reconnect. For a moment, Daniel looked guilty, his shoulders slumping slightly. But then his eyes flicked back to Ethan, and his suspicion returned. Even so, this setup feels off. Why are you holed up in a hotel room doing whatever this is? Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. If you must know, I'm working on classified research, things that aren't meant for public discussion. And trust me, the fewer people involved, the better. Classified research? Daniel repeated skeptically. In a hotel? That doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense if you understand the context, Ethan shot back. But since you clearly don't, maybe you should leave it alone. Karoline could see the argument escalating and stepped in once more. Please, both of you, stop. This isn't getting us anywhere. Daniel, I'll explain everything later, I promise. Right now, we need to focus on sorting out the room issue. Daniel hesitated, clearly torn between anger and concern. Finally, he nodded stiffly. Fine. But I want answers soon, Karoline. Real ones. With that, he turned and left the room, closing the door behind him with a firm click. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning. Well, that went well, Ethan muttered sarcastically, returning. To his seat at the desk, Karoline sank back onto the bed, rubbing her temples. This whole thing is a disaster. Tell me about it, Ethan agreed. Your husband seems like the jealous type. He's not usually like that, she protested. He's just protective and stressed. Work has been overwhelming for him lately. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Sounds familiar. Karoline looked at him curiously. What do you mean? He hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. Forget I said anything. She stared at him for a moment, sensing that he was holding back. But before she could ask more questions, her phone buzzed again. It was Lisa, texting to confirm that room 806 was ready for her whenever she wanted to move. Karoline sighed, replying that she'd come down shortly. As she packed up her things, Ethan watched her quietly. You know, he said finally, you don't have to go if you don't want to. I'm not great company, but at least you won't have to deal with any more mix-ups. Karoline smiled faintly. Thanks, but I think it's best if I stick to my own room. Besides, I doubt Daniel would approve. Ethan smirked. Probably not. Still, if you ever want to talk science or anything else, you know where to find me. She nodded, slinging her purse over her shoulder. I'll keep that in mind. With one last glance at the strange symbols and equations on the desk, Karoline left the room, heading toward the elevator. As the doors closed behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's presence and his mysterious work was somehow tied to the odd energy she'd sensed in the hotel since arriving. Whatever was going on, she realized, this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. Karoline stepped into her new room, room 806, and let out a long breath. The space was smaller than Ethan's suite, but still luxurious, with soft lighting, a king-sized bed, and a window that overlooked the city skyline. She dropped her purse on the desk and sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened in the past hour. Her surprise visit to Daniel had turned into a series of unexpected twists, starting with Lisa's booking, mistaken ending with an encounter with Ethan Cole, a man who seemed to carry secrets far bigger than she could comprehend. Her mind kept drifting back to those strange symbols and equations on Ethan's papers. What kind of research required such complexity? And why did he seem so guarded about it? The more she thought about it, the more curious she became. There was something about him, his intensity, his focus, that made her wonder if his work wasn't just theoretical. Could it be real? Could it actually change the world? As she sat there lost in thought, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Daniel. Can we talk? Meet me in the lounge on the ground floor. Karoline hesitated. Part of her wanted to avoid another confrontation, especially after their tense exchange earlier. But another part of her knew they needed to clear the air. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the elevator, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The hotel lounge was dimly lit, with comfortable chairs arranged around low tables. A few guests lingered quietly, sipping drinks or reading books. Daniel was sitting near the corner nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as Karoline approached, his expression unreadable. "Hey," she said softly, taking a seat across from him. "Hey," he replied, his tone neutral. "I didn't mean to snap at you earlier, I'm just stressed." "I know," she said, reaching out to touch his hand. "And I shouldn't have shown up unannounced like this. It wasn't fair to you." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that. I appreciate the effort, really. But seeing you in that guy's room, it threw me off. Who is he, anyway?" Karoline hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't feel comfortable sharing too much about Ethan. Not yet. "His name is Ethan Cole. He says he's a physicist working on some kind of classified project. That's all I know." "A physicist?" Daniel repeated skeptically. "In a hotel? Doing what exactly?" She shrugged. He didn't go into detail, just said it was complicated. Daniel frowned, clearly unconvinced. "Complicated doesn't cut it, Karoline. Something about him feels off, and I don't like the idea of you being around someone like that." Karoline bristled slightly at his protectiveness. "I can take care of myself, Daniel. Besides, it's not like I asked to share a room with him. It was a mistake." "I get that," Daniel said quickly, holding up his hands. "But accidents happen for a reason. Maybe it's a sign we need to pay attention to things happening around here." "What do you mean?" she asked, frowning. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There have been weird things going on in this hotel lately. Guests complaining about noises in the walls, staff members saying they've seen shadows moving where there shouldn't be any. Even I've noticed stuff, lights flickering, doors opening by themselves. At first I thought it was just old wiring or people exaggerating, but now..." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. "You think Ethan's involved somehow?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But it's worth looking into. Whatever he's doing, it might not be safe." Karoline nodded slowly, her curiosity turning into unease. If Daniel was right, then maybe Ethan's research wasn't as harmless as he claimed. Still, something inside her resisted jumping to conclusions. She'd seen glimpses of his dedication, his passion for his work. Was he really capable of causing harm? "I'll keep an eye on him," she promised. "But let's not jump to conclusions until we know more." Daniel didn't look entirely satisfied, but he nodded. "All right, just be careful, okay?" "I will," she assured him, squeezing his hand before standing up. "I'm going to head back to my room. We can talk more tomorrow." When Karoline returned to room 806, she found herself unable to relax. Her conversation with Daniel had left her unsettled, and her thoughts kept circling back to Ethan. Finally, she decided to act on impulse. Grabbing her keycard, she walked down the hall to room 804 and knocked lightly on the door. Ethan opened it almost immediately, looking surprised to see her. "Karoline, is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something," she said bluntly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "What exactly are you researching?" Ethan closed the door behind her, his expression guarded. "Why the sudden interest?" "Because my husband mentioned some strange things happening in this hotel," she explained. "Noises, lights flickering, shadows moving." "Do you know anything about that?" Ethan hesitated, then gestured for her to sit down. "Okay, listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you stays between us. Understood?" Karoline nodded, her heart pounding. "Understood." He took a deep breath. The Grand Horizon Hotel isn't just a luxury accommodation. Beneath it lies a secret experimental facility. Years ago, scientists detected anomalies in this area. Energy fluctuations suggesting the existence of a portal to another dimension. My team was sent here to study these phenomena, but our latest experiment went wrong. Now the portal is unstable, leaking fragments of an unknown world into ours. Karoline stared at him, stunned. A portal? To another dimension? Are you serious? As serious as a heart attack, Ethan replied grimly. That's why I'm holed up in this room. I'm trying to stabilize the situation before it gets worse. But how is that even possible? She asked, her voice trembling. Dimensions, portals, it sounds like science fiction. It's not fiction, Ethan said firmly, and neither are the risks. If the portal collapses completely, it could tear apart the fabric of reality, not just here but everywhere. Karoline felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was saying. Why haven't you told anyone? The authorities? The hotel management? Because no one would believe me, he interrupted. And even if they did, they'd shut us down and cover it up. We're on our own. For a moment, Karoline didn't know what to say. Everything she thought she knew about the world seemed to be crumbling around her. Yet, despite the fear gnawing at her insides, she couldn't ignore the spark of determination igniting within her. What can I do to help? She asked finally. Ethan blinked, clearly taken aback. Help? You don't want any part of this, trust me. I already am part of it, she countered. If what you're saying is true, then ignoring it won't make it go away. Besides, I owe it to Daniel, and everyone else in this hotel, to try. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his sharp eyes searching hers. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but don't say I didn't warn you. Over the next hour, Ethan explained the basics of his research, showing her diagrams and simulations on his laptop. While much of it went over her head, Karoline absorbed what she could, asking questions whenever something didn't make sense. By the end of their conversation, she felt a mix of awe and terror. The stakes were higher than she'd imagined, and the clock was ticking. As she prepared to leave, Ethan stopped her with a hand on her arm. One last thing, he said quietly. Whatever happens, stay close to me. Things are about to get dangerous. Karoline nodded, her resolve hardening. Dangerous or not, she was ready to face whatever came next. Karoline didn't sleep well that night. Every time she closed her eyes, images of glowing portals and shadowy figures flickered in her mind. The weight of Ethan's words pressed down on her like a storm cloud, making it impossible to relax. By morning, she felt drained but determined. She couldn't sit idly by while something so dangerous loomed beneath the hotel and possibly beyond. Whatever was happening, she had decided to help no matter the cost. When she returned to room 804 later that day, Ethan was already hard at work. Papers were scattered across the desk, his laptop screen displaying rows of data and graphs that meant little to Karoline. He looked up as she entered, his expression tense. Good, you're here, he said without preamble. We don't have much time. What's wrong? Karoline asked, closing the door behind her. The portal is destabilizing faster than I expected, Ethan explained, pointing to a graph on his screen. See this spike? It's getting worse by the hour. If we don't act soon, it could collapse completely, and that's when things get catastrophic. Karoline swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. What do we need to do? Ethan hesitated, then gestured for her to sit. The facility under the hotel has equipment designed to monitor and stabilize the portal, but accessing it won't be easy. Security protocols are tight, and if anyone finds out what we're doing, we'll figure it out, Karoline interrupted firmly. Tell me what I need to do. Ethan nodded, impressed by her determination. First, we need to get into the basement lab. There's a service elevator near the kitchen staff area. It leads directly to the lower levels. Once we're inside, I'll recalibrate the machinery to contain the energy fluctuations. You'll keep watch for any signs of trouble. Guards, alarms, anything unusual. Karoline frowned. And if something goes wrong? Then we improvise, Ethan replied, grimly. But we can't afford to fail. They waited until late evening, when most of the hotel guests would be settling in for the night. Dressed in dark clothes to blend in, they slipped through the corridors toward the staff area. The kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of refrigerators and the faint clinking of dishes being cleaned. No one noticed them as they located the service elevator hidden behind a set of double doors. The ride down was nerve-wracking. The elevator creaked and groaned as it descended, the dim lighting casting long shadows on the walls. When the doors finally opened, they stepped into a narrow hallway, lined with pipes and exposed wiring. A red emergency light pulsed overhead, giving the space an eerie glow. "This way," Ethan whispered, leading her down the hall. At the end was a heavy steel door marked, "Authorized personnel only." He pulled out a small device from his pocket, a key card reader rigged with wires, and inserted it into the lock. After a moment of static, the door clicked open. Inside the lab was a maze of humming machines, blinking control panels, and monitors displaying streams of data. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and the floor vibrated slightly underfoot. In the center of the room stood a massive cylindrical structure, surrounded by cables and sensors. This, Karoline realized, was the heart of the operation, the machine stabilizing the portal. Ethan immediately got to work, typing commands into a nearby console. His fingers flew over the keyboard, his brow furrowed in concentration. Karoline stayed close, keeping an eye on the entrances while glancing nervously at the monitors. Strange symbols flashed across the screens, accompanied by warnings about energy surges and structural instability. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a brief second before backup generators kicked in. Karoline gasped, her pulse racing. "What was that?" "An energy spike," Ethan muttered, not looking up. "It's hitting harder than before. We're running out of time." As if on cue, the ground trembled slightly, followed by a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within the walls. Karoline's stomach churned. She glanced around, half expecting something, or someone, to appear out of nowhere. "Duko, you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan paused, listening. "Yeah, it's starting." "What is?" she demanded, her voice rising despite herself. "The bleed-through," he said grimly, "fragments of the other dimension seeping into ours. Shadows, noises, movement, it's all part of it." Before she could respond, one of the monitors flared brightly, displaying a live feed from the hotel lobby. On screen, guests milled about, as usual, but something was off. Figures moved in the background, their forms indistinct and shifting unnaturally. One guest froze mid-step, staring blankly ahead as though entranced. Another stumbled forward, clutching their head in confusion. "Oh my God," Karoline breathed, stepping closer to the screen. "Is this happening right now?" "Yes," Ethan confirmed. "And it's spreading. That's why we need to finish this quickly." He returned to the console, adjusting settings and rerouting power flows. The machine in the center began to hum louder, its surface glowing faintly blue. For a moment, everything seemed to stabilize. The tremors stopped, the light steadied, and the chaotic data on the screen smoothed out. But the relief was short-lived. A loud crack echoed through the room, followed by a surge of energy that sent sparks flying from the control panel. Ethan cursed, pulling back just in time to avoid being shocked. "What happened?" Karoline shouted over the noise. "A feedback loop," Ethan yelled back. "The system's rejecting the recalibration. Can you fix it?" "I'm trying." He frantically typed new commands, sweat beading on his forehead. The machine roared louder, its glow intensifying until it filled the entire room with an otherworldly light. Karoline turned away, shielding her eyes. That's when she saw it. A shadow moving along the wall, twisting and contorting like smoke caught in a breeze. It wasn't alone. More shapes appeared, slithering across the floor and ceiling, their movements unnatural and hypnotic. "Ethan!" she screamed, backing toward him. "Look!" Ethan glanced up, his face pale. "They're breaking through." "What are they?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I don't know," he admitted. "But they're not friendly." The shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, their features blurred and distorted. They reached out with elongated limbs, their touch sending ripples through the air like heat waves. One of them lunged toward Karoline, forcing her to stumble backward. "Stay behind me," Ethan ordered, grabbing a metal rod from a nearby workbench. He swung it wildly, driving the creature back temporarily. "I need 2 more minutes." Karoline clutched a chair, using it as a makeshift weapon as another shadow advanced. Her hand shook, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She struck at the figure, which dissolved into mist only to reform moments later. "Hurry!" she cried, dodging another attack. Finally, Ethan slammed his fist onto the console. "Got it." The machine let out a deafening whine, its glow pulsing rapidly before stabilizing into a steady blue light. The shadows froze mid-motion, their forms wavering like mirages before vanishing entirely. The tremors ceased and the room fell silent except for the soft hum of the equipment. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan sank to his knees, exhaling shakily. "It worked," he murmured. "The portal is stable. For now." Karoline dropped the chair, her legs giving out beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her face. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or relief, she couldn't tell. "You saved us," Ethan said quietly, looking at her with genuine gratitude. "Without your help, I wouldn't have made it." She shook her head weakly. "We did it together." As they sat there catching their breath, the reality of what they'd accomplished and how close they'd come to disaster began to sink in. The danger wasn't over, not entirely, but for now they had bought themselves some time. And in that moment, that was enough. The silence in the lab was almost deafening after the chaos had subsided. Karoline sat on the cold floor, her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her hands still trembled, and her body ached from the adrenaline rush that had kept her moving during those terrifying moments. Across from her, Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he stared at the glowing machine in the center of the room. Its soft blue light pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat, signaling that the portal was stable. "For now, we did it," Ethan said finally, breaking the quiet. His voice was low, almost reverent. "For a while I thought we wouldn't make it." Karoline nodded slowly, her throat too dry to speak right away. When she finally found her voice, it came out hoarse. "What happens next? Is this over?" Ethan shook his head, his expression grim. "Not even close. Stabilizing the portal buys us time, but it's not a permanent fix. The energy fluctuations are still there. They're just contained for now. Eventually they'll build up again unless we find a way to shut the portal down completely." "And can we do that?" Karoline asked, her heart sinking at the thought of more danger ahead. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "Shutting it down might be impossible without causing catastrophic damage. Closing a dimensional rift isn't like flipping a switch. If we mess it up, the consequences could be worse than leaving it open." Karoline sighed, running a hand through her hair. She felt overwhelmed, exhausted, and yet strangely resolved. Despite everything, she couldn't walk away, not when so much was at stake. "Then what's the plan?" Ethan looked at her, surprised by her determination. "You've already done more than enough. You should go back upstairs, rest, and forget about all this. Let me handle the rest." "No," Karoline said firmly, surprising even herself with how strong her voice sounded. "I'm in this now. Whatever happens, I want to help. You said it yourself, we can't afford to fail." Ethan studied her for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "All right. But you need to understand something. This isn't going to get easier. If anything, it's going to get harder and more dangerous." "I'm ready," Karoline replied, though deep down she wasn't sure if that was true. Over the next several days, Karoline and Ethan worked tirelessly to monitor the portal and gather data. They spent hours poring over readings, analyzing patterns, and brainstorming solutions. During this time, Karoline grew closer to Ethan, not romantically, but as partners bound by shared purpose. She admired his intelligence, his dedication, and his willingness to risk everything to protect others. For his part, Ethan began to see Karoline as more than just an accidental ally. She had proven herself capable, brave, and resourceful beyond his expectations. Meanwhile, strange occurrences continued throughout the hotel, though less frequently now that the portal was stabilized. Guests reported hearing whispers in empty hallways or seeing fleeting shadows dart past their doors. Some claimed their belongings moved on their own, while others swore they saw figures standing at the edge of their vision, only to vanish when they turned to look. Daniel noticed these reports piling up and became increasingly suspicious, especially after spotting Karoline sneaking into the service elevator late one night. "Where were you?" he demanded the next morning, cornering her in the lounge. Karoline hesitated, torn between honesty and secrecy. Before she could answer, Ethan appeared, saving her from having to lie outright. "She was helping me," he said smoothly, stepping between them. "There's been some unusual activity in the hotel. Lately, electrical issues, strange noises, that sort of thing. I've been investigating it, and your wife has been kind enough to assist me." Daniel frowned, clearly skeptical. "Unusual activity? Like what?" "Like flickering lights, malfunctioning equipment, things like that," Ethan replied vaguely. "Nothing major, but it's worth looking into." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he glanced between them. "Why does it feel like you're hiding something?" "We're not," Karoline assured him quickly. "It's just complicated." Daniel didn't look convinced, but he let it drop, for now. "Fine, but I'm keeping an eye on both of you." As the days passed, Karoline and Ethan made progress. But it came at a cost. The strain of constant vigilance wore on them, and the looming threat of another collapse weighed heavily on their minds. Late one night, as they reviewed data in the lab, Ethan turned to Karoline with a troubled expression. "There's something I haven't told you," he confessed. "About why I'm really here." "What is it?" Karoline asked, bracing herself for bad news. Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "This isn't just about science or discovery. My team, we weren't sent here purely for research. There are people, powerful people, who want to exploit the portal for their own gain. They think it could give them access to unimaginable power, resources, maybe even weapons. If they succeed, it won't just endanger this hotel. It could change the world." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. "And you're trying to stop them?" "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "But I can't do it alone. That's why I need your help, not just with the technical stuff, but with staying one step ahead of them." Karoline nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll stop them together, whatever it takes." Their opportunity came sooner than expected. One evening, as they monitored the portal, alarms blared throughout the lab. Someone, or something, was attempting to breach the system remotely. Ethan sprang into action, typing furiously to counteract the intrusion. On the monitors, lines of code scrolled rapidly, accompanied by flashing warnings. "They're trying to override the controls," Ethan shouted over the noise. "If they succeed, they'll destabilize the portal." "What do we do?" Karoline yelled, panic rising in her chest. "Keep them distracted," Ethan ordered, pointing to a secondary console. "Enter random commands to confuse their algorithm. I'll try to trace the source." Karoline rushed to the console, her fingers flying over the keys as she inputted nonsensical sequences. The screen flickered erratically, displaying fragmented messages that hinted at the intruder's location. Meanwhile, Ethan worked feverishly to pinpoint their origin, muttering under his breath as he pieced together clues. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan slammed his hand onto the keyboard. "Got it! They're coming from the penthouse suite." "The penthouse?" Karoline repeated, confused. "Who's staying there?" "No one legitimate," Ethan growled. "It must be a front for whoever's behind this. We need to confront them." Armed with flashlights and makeshift tools, they raced upstairs to the penthouse. The door was locked, but Ethan used his rigged keycard reader to bypass the security system. Inside, they found a high-tech setup, computers, servers, and surveillance equipment, all focused on controlling the portal. A figure stood near the window, silhouetted against the city lights. "You're too late," the figure said calmly, turning to face them. It was a woman, elegant and poised, with piercing green eyes and a confident smile. "The portal will open fully within minutes. Resistance is futile." "Who are you?" Karoline demanded, stepping forward despite her fear. The woman chuckled softly. "Let's just say I represent those who see the bigger picture. Humanity's potential lies beyond this world, and I intend to unlock it." "You're insane," Ethan spat. Do you have any idea what you're risking? You'll destroy everything. Or create something better, the woman countered, her tone icy. Either way, it's out of your hands now. Before either of them could react, the ground shook violently, and a blinding light filled the room. The portal had destabilized again, tearing through reality like fabric. Shadows poured in from the edges, writhing and twisting as they consumed the space around them. "Stop it," Karoline screamed, lunging toward the control panel. With Ethan's guidance, she managed to initiate a shutdown sequence, overriding the woman's commands. The light dimmed and the shadows receded, leaving the room eerily silent. When the dust settled, the woman was gone, vanished as quickly as she had appeared. Exhausted but victorious, Karoline and Ethan collapsed onto the floor, holding each other upright as they caught their breath. "It's done," Ethan whispered. "We stopped her. For now," Karoline added, her voice heavy with the knowledge that the fight wasn't truly over. As dawn broke over the city, Karoline stood on the balcony of her room, gazing at the horizon. The hotel, and the world, was safe for the moment. But she knew the mysteries of the universe were far from solved, and somehow she felt certain that her journey was only beginning.